Schools have come a long way in closing the achievement gap for students with learning disabilities, but those students and their parents still need support from partners in the community. One example is the Garrett Pressley Autism Resource Center in Boston. It was founded 25 years ago by our guest. We'd like to welcome the founder and executive director, Deborah Smith-Pressley. Thank you very much for being with us, Deborah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Even before you founded this center, you were an editor, a professional educator, but then you had a son who has autism.
Yes.
So what happens next?
Well, that's a big question mark. Even though I was a parent and an educator with a lot of experience, I wasn't prepared for the disability of autism. My son, first of all, was not diagnosed until the age of 5. So we were talking to the pediatrician, and Garrett was making all the milestones that he needed to make. He had eye contact.
And this is your son, Garrett, of course.
This is my son, Garrett Pressley, yes. He was doing all the developmental things that a child should do. We noticed that Garrett was forming full sentences, and he regressed from full sentences to 2 words. And I kept saying he's not speaking enough, he's not conversing enough. And it wasn't until the age of 5 that we did receive that definitive diagnosis of being on the autism spectrum.
Well, like many parents who get that kind of a diagnosis, it feels catastrophic, but
Yes.
How did you respond to that? What did you do next?
Okay, immediately when we found out what the diagnosis was, my husband and I, we sat in the room with the professionals, the medical professionals, and we, heard what they said. We swallowed, and then we said, okay, now tell us, what are the best schools? What is the best therapy for Garrett so that we can move forward? And they said, did you hear us? We said Garrett has autism, and it's a lifelong learning disability. He is broken and he will never be fixed. We had to kind of like overlook that type of information that we were given. And my husband and I were both on the same page. We said, okay, we accept this. Now let's move forward and search for the best therapies. So we were determined not to be defeated.
Of course, what you had to do is find the best possible solution for your son. Many
Yes.
parents are in this. Some of them find wonderful solutions and some of them don't. So what's going on out there?
Well, what's going on? A lot of things. First of all, it's not being informed. You know the saying, knowledge is power. I began to go to every seminar, every city and state inside of Massachusetts, outside of Massachusetts, and I educated myself on everything pertaining to autism. What I learned, I brought back to my husband, and we talked about it. And I did put the trust in the school system to place Garrett in a language-based classroom. And what I later learned was that he wasn't receiving many services at all. And the magic word that I learned was ABA, which stands for Applied Behavioral Analysis. I learned attending a seminar at Boston University many years ago. There was a parent that spoke and wrote a book on autism, and her children were receiving applied behavior analysis. I ran home and I said to my husband, I don't know what ABA is, but whatever it is, we're going to get it for Garrett.
So let's fast forward here to what's been happening in more recent years, because there are some good solutions in the schools, but there's also only so much you can do just in the school. So where does your center come in?
Oh, my center comes in a great deal. On my journey, I learned that we were successful as a family because we joined together, we provided ourselves with knowledge about autism, and then the most important ingredient is know your child. So everyone in my family knew Garrett. So we know what he likes, what he doesn't like, what he's interested in, what behaviors may trigger some things in the environment. We looked at our diet, healthy eating habits, recreational activities, and putting Garrett in the best, safest environment were key issues. Also, looking at the family structure, we did not treat Garrett any differently from his siblings. So Garrett had the same discipline structure. He had the same activities. We would go to Disney World. We'd get on the airplane and fly. And one thing I noticed about our family, I included Garrett early on and I never stopped. So I knew that inclusion was part of the key for Garrett, and also giving him the type of services: physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, applied behavioral analysis. I even tried things like green light therapy. Whatever they were saying were proven to be scientific, evidence-based procedures that help children on the autism spectrum we went to get.
We've heard about inclusive classrooms, but talk about the inclusive family. What did that do to him that wouldn't have happened otherwise?
Oh, I think that if Garrett was not included, he would be a loner. He would be isolated. And we would therefore be isolated as well. Me as a wife, and my husband, and auntie, cousins, and my daughter, and my oldest son, we would have been totally excluded. And I want to say this much: when we went to the supermarket, when we go to the car wash, when we went to church, when we went to the super shopping malls, Garrett was always involved. I began my search trying to put him in the YMCA programs, the community center, swimming pools, gymnastics. And my biggest battle was fighting for his inclusion. And it still is a problem to this day.
Well, one of the things you help parents and their children with is this kind of adaptation to the, because you don't just take a kid and say sink or swim. You got to help them along the way too.
That's right. They can't swim unless they've been exposed. So I teach social skills out of the Garrett Pressley Autism Resource Center. And the youth in my social skills group, we go to supermarkets, we go to the movie theaters, we go to restaurants. I teach them the appropriate behaviors and the appropriate social skills to go out into the community, where you live, maybe where you're visiting, and to understand how this is how you go to a restaurant. You order from the menu. You say, excuse me. When you're having a conversation, you don't blurt things out at one another. And I have found that typical teens and children and adolescents and young adults need the same social skill structure that I'm offering to my children and teens and young adults on the autism spectrum.
And I know whether at the center or elsewhere in the community, you give them more recreation, exercise opportunities.
Yes.
Why is that so important?
I think recreation is so very important. If anyone looks up autism, you will find that everybody is different. But one thing that I have found that centers on a common premise for all individuals: sometimes they don't know their own space. For example, they might bump you if you're standing in an aisle and not really be able to judge the distance. Also, the way some individuals see things are very definitive. Someone may see an ant crawling on the floor way over there. We might not see that. And they're very visual. So I looked at the strengths of most people on the autism spectrum, which is visual ability, and I heighten those. So when I teach the social skills, we do it through the performing arts. So I will have skits for them. So it all comes together, and I'm finding that the light bulb kind of clicks on when they can see the demonstration. And the most important skill I teach is body language, because most people on the spectrum aren't looking at you.
I know you can also help people quite a bit with advocacy, but we should mention that if people want to find out more what you're doing at the center, is there some way they can check that out?
Yes, there certainly is. First of all, we have a website, and it's kind of long, but I'm going to cite it out. It's www.gpautismresourcecenter.org. And notice I said GP, that stands for Garrett Pressley. You can also reach me at the business office, area code 617-216-1676.
Right.
And we're there at the Hyde Park Community Center.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Deborah Smith-Pressley. Still to come, we'll tell you about a showcase of new technology happening in Roxbury. But first, this message.